Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, a little bit of housekeeping. I've got a bracelet in case anybody is lost. Please see me if you want to retrieve it. So as Scott said this morning, the MRC just released its proposed standards for cross-platform metrics. Scheduled to go into effect in 2020, these standards could impact literally where billions of dollars go. George Ivie is going to join us now, and George will present a summary of those proposed standards. George is CEO and Executive Director of the Media Ratings Council. George is also the ARF Board of Trustees. George previously was a partner at Ernst & Young, and his background includes 30 years' experience. Please welcome George Ivie.
Okay, well, at least I didn't fall down. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you very much to the ARF for inviting me to speak on these standards. I'm going to tell you a little bit, as Paul said, about a standard that we just released. It's in draft. It's not a final standard, and it's in a stage of production we call public comment. So we basically published the standard, we issued some press around it, and we're inviting people to comment about it, anyone who wants to provide input. So one of my main purposes for being here is to encourage you to look at this standard, and if you have any comments at all, to send them to the MRC. The standard itself is about cross-media measurement. It's been many years in the making. Some people have been screaming at us, asking us why we're so slow. Other people are saying slow down. We did a lot of work to prepare for issuance of this standard. And believe it or not, that work started in the early 2000s, around 2004. We had to establish a better quality foundation in the digital environment to even prepare for this standard. So many of you are probably aware of standards that the MRC set after 2004 until today that actually impact this standard. So this standard in cross-media is really the culmination of other standards that we set earlier. For example, we set a standard on a viewable impression, how to measure that in digital. Prior to that standard, we were monetizing ads in digital that would appear anywhere in the user interface, even if somebody never, for example, scrolled down to see them. We were trying to monetize that, and advertisers were paying for those ads, and they had zero opportunity to see. They weren't even in the viewable port. And so we wanted to eliminate that, and we set some standards for that. We wrote an invalid traffic and fraud filtration standard, which basically most of the world is using now. Organizations like TAG use our standard in applying their process. And we audit a bunch of vendors for invalid traffic filtration. We set a digital audience measurement standard. That's the beginning of a point where we're trying to convert digital trading, or at least encourage the conversion of digital trading from trading on gross impressions to trading on impressions to targeted audience characteristics. And here, don't just think about age and gender. It could be any kind of targeting characteristics that the advertiser or the agency considers important. So in a sense, what we were doing is taking the digital environment and trying to increase the quality of that so that at some point we could write this cross-media standard. And so now, what I'm about to talk about is the standard. The mantra of the standard really is consistency. We really wanted to take all, and this is a phase one of a project focused on video. So video of all derivations, think about linear TV, VOD, OTT, streaming video of all kinds, etc. How do you measure that in an apples-to-apples way? Put it on a report, reported with consistent manner, and people can use that multimedia, essentially, or multi-platform video report. That's a goal of the standard, and to do that in a consistent manner. The standard starts from a base of impressions. So measuring impressions on a consistent basis across the various video derivations. We set, for example, rules in there for granularity of measurement for the impression, when you measure the impression, et cetera, trying to make that as consistent as possible, really trying to direct the marketplace towards second-by-second measurement of impressions appended with duration. We also, just one thing to be careful of, this standard is the last in a series of standards that we're setting about exposure measurement. So it's about counting exposures. It's not about outcomes. It's not about whether somebody likes the brand. There was brand lift, sales lift, ROI. It's not about that. It's simply about counting. It was a very large project. We started it back in December of 2017 and issued the standard, or it was ready to be issued in February 2019. There were about 175 organizations involved in the project team, 300 individuals. And as I mentioned, we're in public comment phase. We're expecting to launch this standard in mid-2019, but there's also a grace period associated with that, because you can't just instantly publish a standard and expect every vendor to have it ready. So there's a phase-in grace period built into the standard. Some of the big picture orientation of the standard is we wanted to create a stronger content focus for digital, because every standard we've written is focused on ad measurement. And it was about time we also started codifying how to measure content in digital. And then in, for example, television environments, we wanted to create a stronger focus on advertising measurement directly, because generally we're not measuring ads directly and transacting on that in the US. As I mentioned before, we have a lot of rules in there about granularity and comparability of the impression measurement. Something you probably heard of is for comparative media reporting, for all the different types of video reporting. We're changing the viewable impression rules to be 100% of pixels. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. We're also codifying a lot of different ways to measure duration, various options, things like actual duration, quartiles, completes, something that's very important to advertisers out there. I build an ad, I want to see how many times people saw the entire ad. And this metric, which is actually pretty highly debated, called duration weighting. And we're diving into sound practices for appending audience information to those transactions. And this is why the standard is like 70 pages, because what I just described has a lot of codified guidance in it in the standard. Things like quality ways to append audience to viewing transactions that don't naturally have audience assigned to them is a very difficult thing and something that's took a lot of time to codify. In the standard, we also talk about deduplication. Probably the most technically difficult area of the standard is deduplicating. Advertisers have very simple questions that they have difficulty answering today. They want to know how many times unique people saw their ads. Simple question, difficult to answer. And they also want to manage their frequency. Simple question, difficult to answer. We have a lot of platforms. We have a lot of different user interfaces. We have different media types for video. And asking those two simple questions, it's very difficult in today's environment, sometimes walled garden environment, to answer those questions. So this standard sets guidance for that. We conducted a lot of research on our own and also reviewed publicly available research on, and this just deals with the two most complex areas of the standard, the pixel change to 100% and the duration weighting component. The pixel change made a lot of sense for consistency purposes. Anytime you increase the demanding nature of the viewability standard, you lose impressions. And in typical, we saw impression loss between 3 and 9%, but the high end 9% was kind of like an outlier. Most of it was pretty small. The duration weighting is another complex thing. We did our own research, so organizations, about 7 organizations, submitted research to us on a confidential basis. You won't get this research unless you hold it confidential because it has a lot of implications on their platform performance. So they don't make this information public. And we reviewed publicly available research and concluded that duration matters. Duration matters in terms of just understanding how long people linger with an impression. We're not saying it matters as an outcome metric yet. That comes in later standardization efforts. Key metrics that are available and codified in the standard: duration, various types; completions, something that we've been told over and over and over is critical; reach, frequency, GRPs, and we're preserving certain legacy metrics in certain circumstances, for example, when ad load is consistent. To be added in 2021 to enable us to do further study is this duration-weighted metric. So you'll see some debate about that, but it's not going to be codified for a couple years, and we still have a lot of back and forth to do with the marketplace on that. This is my contact information. This is about all I can do in 10 minutes. A 70-page standard. We'd really like you to look at it, send us comments, and work with it. I'm happy to take questions from Paul or the audience, or however you guys want to do that.
Thanks, George. That was great. Yeah, let's sit down.
I'll stand if you stand.
Okay, we're running out of time, so let's stand. Duration weighting.
Yes.
As you know, a number of people in the industry are thinking about projects that would somehow or another support empirically what that duration weighting is, a linear line as opposed to curves, and looking for curves. Is the MRC willing to work with those groups? And what would the deadline be if we do research this year and next year? Is that in time to get it in place for the standard?
Well, first of all, we set a deadline of January 2021 to make that component of the standard operable. Anytime before that, we're obviously open to research and understanding people's thoughts on that. But if it turns out there's something compelling, we'll take research after January 2021. I mean, we don't assign like artificial limits to, and then forget it, it's codified. We're not going to listen to you. We don't do that. But we would encourage people who want to study that and help us to, try to help us before that deadline in 2021. What we're trying to do is move the marketplace forward. And duration weighting may not be the right answer, Paul, but we need to think about equivalized units somehow to reflect duration in counting. If I watch 6 of a 6-second commercial and I watch 29 of a 30-second commercial, there should be some ability to differentiate that. And using viewable impression doesn't count because they're both viewable. Using pure duration may be a little bit misleading. So we're trying to build these equivalized units to do it. Those are our ideas, but we're open-minded to others.
So that gets to the 30-second base.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could talk to the room a little bit about the 30-second base and how it came about.
Well, we studied a bunch of cases, and what we found is that if we just use the duration of the ad as a denominator, we think that's a biased method. It's biased towards short-form advertising.
Because 3 out of 6 is 50%.
Yeah.
15 out of 30 is 50%.
Yes. So it might cause like a rush towards more short-form advertising, and who knows, that could be valid. But we wanted to build equivalized units, so we thought we needed a standard base, a fixed base. We went to the marketplace, and what we heard back from numerous agencies in particular was, please, MRC, use 30, because we have systems that are already operationalized on 30 as a base, and it would be the most easy for us to implement on that right now. And if people are migrating wholesale to other ad formats, think about changing it at that point. So that's another reason why it's 2021.
Got it. Is this planning or currency?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's an element of both, I would say. It's certainly currency. We can't control currency. So the MRC likes to set standards, and we encourage people to adopt them. But we're setting a standard for how people should trade, basically. I think that's a primary focus. Planning involves a lot of other things. It's an art nowadays that is pulling together a lot of other information, data, places where the MRC is going, but I'd say principally we're focused on currency.
Interesting. Because I thought in the beginning it was more intended as a planning tool. I'm going to try to quote you a little bit, but you had said at least at the moment, people ought to use the best measure as currency, which would imply continue using C3 in television, which would imply impressions in digital. Is that a kind of a reversal of a position? And if so, why?
It might be a reversal of position because at the very end of the day, people look to the MRC to help them figure out how to do business and what they can trust. And we are having severe problems with all the different silos, just lining them up. We hear that very resoundingly. Those two simple questions that I mentioned about advertisers, they say that over and over to us. They say, just help us solve those two questions. And there's an element of planning, there's an element of currency. We're focusing on this basic impression counting currency first. And then we're working on refining things like outcome measurement. We have some designs to do outcome measurement standards, working with other parties, perhaps collaborating with ARF and MMA and other people, where we can help refine monetization.
Great. We have time for one question from the floor.
One question from the floor.
Any hands? There we go.
My friend Jeff. I think my friend. No, go ahead, Jeff.
What was the most significant opposition you heard to this initiative?
Well, first of all, it's like a 70-page document, and the debate surrounding the document is on 4 pages, essentially, and it's about duration weighting. The marketplace is concerned that people will jump to duration-weighted viewable impressions as an outcome metric. And the truth is that when you duration weight an impression, is the first 5 seconds as valuable, half as valuable as the first 10 seconds, which is not as valuable as the 15? Is that a linear approach? Is that curved? Does value even unfold that way related to time? That's a heavily debated concept. So that's the most debate. It's 4 pages in the document. It doesn't come into play until 2021. We're going to study it. But you got to put positions out. You want to get the marketplace thinking about equivalized units of duration because of all the myriad of advertising that's out there. How to count it as an input into outcome metrics, not the outcome metrics themselves. We need to have some equivalized units to do that. But that's heavily debated, Jeff. That's the point that's out there. The rest of the standard, we're actually, frankly, not getting a lot of debate on. We're getting a lot of concurrence on.
Thanks very much, George. Big round of applause.
Thank you.
By the way, George, last week at the ANA, Mark Pritchard gave the MRC a really good shout out, so congratulations. So our next presentation will take a slightly different approach. Vas Bakopoulos is SVP, Head of Research and Insights at the Mobile Association. He's also on the ARF Board of Trustees. He's responsible for defining the MMA's learning agenda. Vas also leads the organization's research efforts across all programs. Prior to MMA, Vas held senior research positions at Digitas, Publicis, and Kantar. Please welcome Vas.
Hello, everyone, and obviously an extreme honor and privilege to be here. Now, I have about 12 minutes of your time and attention, and